Hello and welcome everyone. Day 3, reading through the 40 chapters of Exodus during the 40 days of Lent. And so now, of course, we are on chapter number 3, where we left off in the first two chapters. The women are the heroes of the plot, or more accurately, the sheroes. And I wonder if there's some effect in the writing that as throughout Genesis and then Exodus, there is this theme that is present that when the God's people, Abraham in Genesis and Isaac as well, and of course his Israel here, Joseph as well back in Genesis, when they come against the great big power is humiliated, and God's people tend to win. And in that patriarchal culture, it was all the more offensive to the Egyptians, to the Pharaoh, to have this narrative of the women who are basically outsmarting, who are circumventing, and who are navigating against, maneuvering, and sidestepping Pharaoh's rule and authority.
So now we are in chapter 3. Moses has become a shepherd on behalf of his father-in-law, who happens to be a priest of Midian. And so essentially his father-in-law is a pagan priest. Moses is shepherding and comes to Mount Horeb. And in all of the societies in the ancient Near East, whether they were of Hebrew faith or of pagan faith, still mountains were considered sacred places. And as he reaches Horeb, here comes this imagery to him, this burning bush as we know it. And of course in Exodus, the idea of God appearing in a flame is something that will come to our attention again. And of course we know the bush was not burned up, was not consumed, which is even more intriguing when we understand the dry heat of that region, that the circumstances there in terms of moisture and all of that would have all the more suggested that this bush would burn up. And not just burn up, but burn up very, very quickly. But here Moses is told to take off of his sandals because he is standing on holy ground. And in verse 6, the voice affirms, "I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And so when we go back to Genesis, and of course, once again, I maintain that to understand Exodus, we have to understand Genesis. What happens here is a special sacred ground where God reaffirms the relationship to forefathers. That's something that occurred throughout Genesis to the patriarchs, and now occurs with Moses. He hides his face in verse 6 because he is afraid to look at God, it says. This is curious, and I'll give you a preview why this is important. Because later, he's no longer afraid to look at God. After he leads the people out of Egypt, he asks God to be able to look at God. And he doesn't hide his face, but his face then reflects the shining light of God and prompts the people to hide their faces from him. Okay, so what is the point of this sacred ground? Verse 7, "I've seen the affliction of my people, I've heard their cry because their taskmasters." Okay, so all of that work that we read that was reinforced in chapter 1 were marked on in chapter number 2. Now God finally hears that and is ready to do something about it. He's ready to deliver them to a land that is spacious, flowing with milk and honey, it says. So I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. And of course, here is Moses, the one who, understanding the honor-shame dimensions of the world of Scripture, he was one who grew up in Pharaoh's household and who departed under, the homicide. And now he is sent to return to Egypt. He went from being honorable in Egypt to shameful. And in that culture, you only can operate within your honor status. To do certain things, it requires a certain amount of honor. And I think what Moses, his concern here isn't just a mere humility, but that he doesn't have the appropriate status to do this. He had to leave Pharaoh's house, and remember, the only voice that he heard from the Hebrews was, "Who made you a judge or ruler over us?" And so, who is going to support him? He's lost his honor. Verse 12, God will support him. I will be with you, and you'll bring the people out of Egypt, and they will serve God at this mountain. Again, this idea of the mountain's important. We'll come back to that in subsequent readings. Moses said, if I go to them and say, the God of your fathers has sent me, they ask, what is his name? What should I say to them? God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, you must say to the Israelites, I have sent you, in verse 14. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So go bring together the elders of the people and say that I have heard from you, that God has heard from you, and God promises to bring you out of Egypt unto a land, and the elders will listen to you. And in fact, not only is God going to bring them out of Egypt, to where then they're going to be nomadic, without a home. That's going to be something we don't have to have a special interest in sociology to realize that homeless, refugee type peoples are not the most stable context, but God is going to do this for them. Pharaoh will resist, but God is going to humble Pharaoh. And then when they leave Egypt, the last couple of verses of this chapter, when they leave Egypt, they're going to leave it with and the Hebrews will have assets. They will have silver and gold and clothing. Not so much that they're going to loot on their way out, but as we will see, Pharaoh is going to almost bribe them in order to get out and in order to release them. And so once more, here there's this indication of almost a satire that that this great Pharaoh of this great empire of Egypt, who is exploiting people, yet he was circumvented in chapter number 1 and chapter number 2 by the women. And not only is this group of God's covenant people going to resist the empire in a sense through the mighty works of God, but he is going to give them assets in order to pay them off to get them to leave. Okay, so these chapters in Exodus are a good dividing point. Sometimes you hear me remark that our chapter divisions are not all that helpful, but once more, chapter number 3 is the third scene in this drama, and now the curtain closes, and we're left waiting for chapter number 4 to see how Moses responds. And so I will meet you again on Saturday, tomorrow, as we read chapter number 4. And then Sunday there will be a break because Sunday is not one of the 40 days of Lent. So as we approach the end of this week, if there's any comments or questions, then please let me know. I am in Columbia, South Carolina today and tomorrow lecturing, and so bear with me, and I'll see most of you, hopefully all of you, on Sunday.